Good afternoon. Welcome to the Pre-Uni New College Term 3 Education webinar. Thank you. I'm David at Pre-Uni New College Head Office, and it's my pleasure to be a moderator for this webinar. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for all of you for your ongoing support throughout this term. And I hope you and your family are all staying safe and healthy throughout these unusual times. So during this week, as a part of Term 3 college event, we've organized special webinar series, especially for Year 5 parents who are concerned about their upcoming selective school exam. So tonight, we have a 2 session of the webinar, and you are now attending the first session that is all about the selective writing test component. And tomorrow, there will be another webinar, and that will be all about the latest information about selective school application procedure. And then lastly, on Friday, we will find more about selective reading test information by Ms. Kelly Jones. Okay. So now I'd like to introduce Ms. Kim Reed, the presenter of tonight's webinar for the information about the new selective writing test. Hello, Kim.
Hi.
Thanks again for joining the webinar tonight. And Ms. Kim is the most famous and well-known teacher at Pre-Uni New College Head Office. She has been working with us since we started college beginning, so 1992, so, and she's teaching English class every Saturday, catering all our top gifted and talented students group. And Kim is also working with our research and development team as an education consultant. And she's helping us to provide the latest up-to-date English curriculum for our selective school preparation course. Okay, then, let's get started. Please welcome Ms. Kim.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to work with you tonight. Special hello to the parents of my beautiful kids in MC1 and MC2 on Saturday morning. I love working with your kids and I miss seeing them face to face, but with fingers crossed, we might get back there before too long. Okay, so what I'm going to do tonight or this evening is give you some insight into how we work with the kids to prepare them for the writing test. And we know that the writing test is a little bit fraught. It's probably the most difficult to prepare for because there's so many variables and so many unknowns and possibilities that can come up in the writing task. And because it's the element of the test that has everything has to come from the child. It has to come from the student. The test paper itself is just a few words essentially, and then from that prompt the students have to produce a piece of text. Okay, so let's go through and see if we can get some insights that might help you and help you to help your students, your children. Okay, so we know that the writing test in the selective, and I should probably preface this by saying what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is not necessarily a universal commentary on how to produce a great piece of writing. It's a commentary on how to produce a piece of writing that's going to optimize your score in this particular test. And I'm sure many of you work in occupations or professions where you have to write documents for your work, whether they be reports or proposals or drafts or all kinds of documentation that we might produce in the workplace. And we're not usually asked to do that in 30 minutes with no background, no scaffolding, no support, and no opportunities to redraft. So it's a pretty unusual writing situation. And that's why what we're going to talk about today is specific to producing a piece of writing in a 30-minute time frame for a test. Okay, so what do we need to have to do well in the test? Well, we need ideas. We need something to write about. And it's the creativity that sits around those ideas that's a bit of a challenge. The purpose, which will probably be determined largely by the prompt, and that will influence the structure. So the purpose refers to the kind of writing they will be asked to produce, and the kind of writing will influence the way they organize or structure their text. Our best friends in every piece of writing, and sometimes our worst enemies, I might say, are our grammar, punctuation, and spelling, and I'll unpack those a little bit more as we go through. And then there's our other dearest and dearest darlingest friend, the vocabulary that we're going to use to create our ideas. Okay, so when we need to start with our ideas, and what's a challenge for kids in this situation is they have to come up with a creative response to the prompt. And when I say a creative response, we're trying to teach the kids not to go with the obvious response, that the first thing that might come into their head, essentially, okay? The ideas is one of those aspects of the text where a good student can really differentiate themselves from the other thousands of students who are doing exactly the same task. They have to think of, okay, there are a number of ways I could create a response to this piece of writing, but how can I do this that might be a little bit different, a little bit more exciting, a little bit more innovative than what most students might come up with? Now, the structure's it's easy to teach kids structure. It's the easiest thing in the world to teach them. Getting them to do it well is another thing. And the structure will depend a lot on the type of writing that the student ends up doing. But in essence, most pieces of writing will have some kind of introduction or orientation. And this is something that kids don't always do well. They leap into the main idea of the text because their minds are racing really quickly and they think, oh, I've got to get going on this. And when a marker or a reader comes to the piece of text, they're struggling to work out what's going on because the student hasn't drawn the reader in or the marker in by orienting them or introducing them to the text. Mostly the students will be writing in paragraphs and they should be developing a central idea and they should reach an end point. And I have absolutely and deliberately avoided the word conclusion there because it's a nightmare. Most texts don't conclude. Conclusion is very final, okay? Some texts will have a concluding statement, but you know, an end point is a point at which the text can round off. The reader can feel satisfied. Oh, I understand why we're stopping here, but it doesn't have finality about it. And this is particularly true in a piece of creative or narrative writing. It's very rare to conclude a narrative. There's always something more. There's always something left for the reader to think about. Unless you kill off every single character at the end of the text, oh, they're all dead, then it's probably not a conclusion, okay? It's probably more of an end point. And when I work with my kids, I try to get them to get a differentiation between a conclusion and an end point. Now, I'm trying not to overload you with all kinds of jargon, but I am trying to use the language that's used in marking criteria to help sort of get you into the text, how the test is marked. So coherence and cohesion are the words that we use when we're marking or grading a piece of writing. And really all that means is, does the text as a whole have a sense of belonging together? It's not just a whole lot of bits all thrown together. And, you know, students are often guilty of doing this, especially in the world of, you know, the online world and the internet world. Oh, I'll just grab a little bit from that text and I'll grab a few words and phrases from here. Oh, and look at this great idea, I'll shove that in. And then, you know, we end up with a typical dog's breakfast style piece of writing that doesn't have a sense of the whole thing works together. So coherence and cohesion are actually graded in the paper. They will get recognised for their ability to create a text with a sense of wholeness. So this is about organising their ideas logically. And logically, I'm using in a very sort of open sense, basically to mean make sense, that they can transition from one idea to the next, that the reader actually understand how idea one develops into idea two and so on. And they need devices to link their ideas. And by devices here, this is actually the language of a marking criteria. Devices simply means what words and phrases do they use to make sure there is coherence, links between the sentences, paragraphs, etc. Okay. I hope we're going okay with this. It's really difficult when you can't see your audience. Okay, so here's a writing prompt. This is the kind of thing that you use as a writing prompt in a test like the Selective high school test, because you do not and you cannot direct the children. They will make the prompt as open as possible. And the reason they do that is they will get a lot of very formulaic pieces of writing where students have been taught to write to a formula. This kind of a prompt throws those kids because they're given no idea of what to write. Their instruction will be something like respond to this piece of text, or it will never say write a story about a duck that fell off a ship. Okay. And so if your students, your kids are used to being given a lot of scaffolding and a lot of structure in the instructions, they've got to get used to not, okay? So what type of writing or what kind of ideas would come to students with a very open prompt like this? And of course, there's no right answer. There's absolutely no right answer. So this is where the creativity comes in. And even the type of writing might come in. It would be perfectly valid to write a piece of persuasive writing about plastic pollution in the ocean for this text, or it would be perfectly valid to write a piece of writing about a child that lost a toy at sea, or it would be perfectly valid to write a really metaphorical piece of writing about taking on being something small and insignificant and taking on a huge challenge. Can you see there's infinite possibilities in this prompt? And it's the kids who score well who will think, how can I really stretch my imagination? How can I really stretch myself with this prompt? Okay. And we'll talk a little bit about the thinking processes that might come into play to help kids to go through that thinking process and get to something that isn't obvious or formulaic or predictable. Okay, so I thought I'd just share a little bit of writing with you. And these are authentic pieces of writing. Obviously, I've de-identified the student who created them, but they're very typical. And this is often what the standard of writing that I often see when the kids come in at the beginning of the course. And it's quite difficult to kill some of these habits, but we do our best. So here we go. Let's have a look at what this little person wrote. Darkness was all around us as we walked around the cave. Sounds okay? Yeah, okay, all right. Gloomy shadows hung on the walls as I entered. Now, if you just pick out some of the language in this, that's not too bad. Gloomy shadows. Don't we love description? But are we missing something absolutely fundamental here? Because we've already changed from we to I. So that's fundamental. Okay, you can have all the gloomy shadows hanging around on walls that you like. If you can't even stick your pronouns together properly, you're not going to get there. Okay, the torch in my hand was the only light emitting object in the cavern. Now, if you take that phrase on its own, it sounds pretty powerful. But the marker is going to say, it's a torch. You don't have to tell me it's a light-emitting object. That kind of use of what sounds like high-level language is absolutely useless. Absolutely useless, because telling a marker that a torch is a light-emitting object is not going to get you any marks at all. I hope you can see that this is what I'm trying to point out here is this is where kids think if they make the language overly complex, it'll be rewarded. It doesn't make sense. Calling a torch a light-emitting object is not helping the text at all, okay? The walls were meeting in an apex. Well, there were no walls. They were in a cave. Remember? Oh, yeah, we're in a cave or a cavern. We haven't got walls. But anyway, even assuming that we could call the sides of the cave walls, they were meeting an apex. Again, this sounds, when you first read it, go, that's pretty sophisticated. It's meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. This child is attempting to include language that they think sounds sophisticated and important, but if it's not used purposefully and it doesn't advance the idea, you're not going to get any marks for it, just wasting your time putting words on a page. I said hello, and all I could hear was the echo of my voice, no full stop at the end. Oh my goodness, basic punctuation emitted. Okay, so the whole purpose of this paragraph was to orient the reader. It's not doing a very good job. Okay, then we get to another example. This was from a different task altogether. These are just little snippets out of kids' pieces of writing. There was not enough room to swing a cat around. Oh, so let's use this little cliche. Not bad, not terrible. And we were packed like sardines. What is the point of sticking two idioms that say exactly the same thing into a sentence? It's not a test on how many idioms do you know. It's a test on can you convey a message through a piece of written text. Our shadows look like monsters. Oh, nice. On the walls. Okay, that's all right. And our backpacks were victims. What on earth does that have to, second half of the sentence have to do with the first half? Now you can reread it and you can attempt to put some meaning to it. Maybe the student meant the shadows on the walls look like monsters, and maybe the monsters looked like they were attacking the backpacks. Now the marker's not going to do that. The marker is there to take the text at its face value, not to go back and reread it and speculate on what the child might have meant. What the child puts on the page is what they get marked on, not what in schools, teachers will be able to sit with students, talk through their text, and what did you mean here? That doesn't happen in a test. The text has to hold value on its own without the child there to explain what they thought or what they intended. It's got to hold meaning absolutely on its own. Okay, now I'm just going to see if I can read this one. Okay, we don't need to go through thousands of these examples, but this one is, I had enough audacity to tremble up the rusty door and pull it open silently. It's another example of what on earth are you trying to say? The strategy is, this is my message. Now I'm going to find the best quality language I can to express it. This person wants to open a door. We don't need a 3-clause sentence full of all sorts of complex vocabulary that doesn't enhance the message. Use the complex vocabulary, but use it purposefully. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, what have I done there? I've got to get rid of all this stuff on the page. Sorry. Oh, my eraser's not working. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, thank you. All right. So what problems do students face attempting to create a piece of text? They struggle to come up with an idea. And remember, this is a hugely pressurized situation, so they've got to have lots and lots of practice in coming up with creative ideas that are not scaffolded, that are not without a lot of direction, that they can do that on the spot and not just freeze when they're presented with a prompt or come up with a very pedestrian, mundane idea. Sometimes kids will tell me that I know my writing's not really good, but I don't know what to do to improve it. And that's where, you know, you've really got to, the students have got to become strong at analysing the features of their writing and the techniques that they're using and work on the ones that they need to work on to strengthen, okay? All right, poor structure and organisation, probably the easiest thing to teach, as I said, but linking and developing the ideas within the structure is a little bit more challenging. Poor or patchy technical skills, and the SPG is spelling, punctuation and grammar. These are your bottom lines, okay? You cannot, no matter how creative and exciting your ideas are, if you cannot spell at a reasonable level, punctuate actually accurately and use correct sentence level grammar, you got nothing. You got absolutely nothing, because these are foundational skills. And if you're trying to get into a selective high school, they don't want you to have strength in foundational skills. It's a given. You know, you don't get into a selective high school because you know your timetables. You get into a selective high school because you can operate with your times tables at a very high level. Same with spelling, punctuation and grammar. It's the fundamentals. It's the basics. And you cannot allow students to overlook those things and think it'll be okay, they'll know what I mean. They might know what you mean, but they're not going to forgive errors in basic techniques like punctuation, spelling, and grammar. Poor control over sentences. Sentences are the foundation of all of this kind of writing. The text will be in sentences, which hopefully then develop into paragraphs. They must have control over sentences. It's pretty much basic, like spelling, punctuation and grammar. And then vocabulary. And we will talk a little bit more about vocabulary, but the biggest issue with vocabulary is students learning bucket loads of words that they can't use effectively. And it's all the research, and you can go and look up an infinite amount of research that's been done on learning vocabulary, and it will all tell you that learning bucket loads of random words in isolation is useless, because you end up with kids who write like that we saw before, where they know lots and lots of words, they push them into pieces of text, and it doesn't help with meaning. Okay, all right. So I'm just wondering if I can get that out a bit. Let me see. Okay. So it's all been bad news so far. Let's go to the good news. This delightful piece of writing is getting pretty close to standard. And even though I showed you lots of examples of some pretty awful stuff, I'm really excited to share this with you, because this is created by one of my students. And this is an example where she's just pulled everything together beautifully. I'd love to be able to tell you her name. She's gorgeous, but we won't do that. I was trapped. So you think, oh, that's pretty pedestrian beginning, isn't it? Look how she develops that idea. There was no escape and no hope. I took a long, deep breath and tried to stop the uncontrollable shivering. With dilated pupils, my eyes desperately searched for light. Darkness was choking me, I gasped. She's gently woven in the complex vocabulary, the dilated pupils, the desperately searching, but she's done it effectively. It's building tone and atmosphere. How could this have happened? What devices she used? A little rhetorical question. I remembered being late. Now, this is absolutely skillful structuring because she's drawn the reader into the text by putting the reader with her in this situation where she's choking and it's dark. Now she's taken the reader back. She's done a bit of a flashback. Oh, how did I get here? Instead of starting with, one day I remembered hurrying and going to class, pedestrian beginning, she's brought it in the second paragraph. I remembered being late and hurrying to get to class. Within seconds, a force against my back was bulldozing me, my body, into my locker. How long had I been here? Can't move, can't breathe. I feel like a package. Look how she's using figurative language effectively, not walls meeting apexes that don't exist. I feel like a package tightly wrapped. I count my breaths, afraid of losing oxygen. Pushing my face towards the cold metal, I listen intently for the sound. A passing child, a teacher, a cleaner. I yearn desperately to hear the sound of a footstep on the asphalt. Notice how she didn't tell us she was in a school? She gives us the clues. We can work it out for ourselves. A teacher, a cleaner, asphalt. Oh, she's in a school. Not one day when I was at school, I got trapped in my locker. Messaging's the same. It's the way she's putting it together. And look at her choice of verbs. Trapped. Where are we? Desperate, verbs and adverbs. Desperately searched. Can't move. Feel like a packet. Count. Pushing. Yearning desperately. She's got the control, and that's the difference. She knows what she wants to say, and she comes up with a message. This is my situation. I want to tell the reader about being trapped. Okay, now how can I craft that idea? It's a pretty simple idea. How can I craft that idea using my vocabulary, but using it effectively? And look at the variety in sentence patterns. Short ones, long ones. Questions, rhetorical questions. It's a really powerful piece of writing. And when you think that when she created this piece of writing, she's still got a while to go before the test. So we're going to be able to hone those skills. We're going to be able to even finesse them and hone them and get her to an even stronger position. That's your standard. It's fabulous. That's what we're aiming for. In fact, we're aiming a little bit higher than that because we're still a few months out from the test before she actually has to respond to something. Okay. So what makes writing really, really complex? There's all these elements or features that need to go into a piece of writing. And that's great. And it's really good that students understand each one of the features individually and how they work, but it's bringing them all together and using them with a sense of what we call automaticity, and I'll unpack that a little bit for you, that will create a good piece of writing. And I guess if you kind of have an analogy of, I'm assuming most of you can drive. So when you are learning to drive, when we thought about things like, the indicators, the brakes, the steering wheel, the road signs, all these things that influence us when we're driving. But now, once we've been driving for a while, we don't get in the car and think, which foot do I put for the brake, the accelerator, how do I have my hands on the steering wheel? That's all automatic. All we think about is, I'm here and I'm trying to get to there. Do I need to put the sat nav on? We don't need to think about all the sub skills that sit behind a driving activity because we do those with automaticity. Okay, and that's where we've got to get to with our kids so that they've got control over all of these features, right? And I could have added a gazillion more boxes there, but I thought, no, that's probably overwhelming enough. And all they have to think about when they're in the test is bringing all those things together in a coherent manner to create a good piece of writing like we saw just a moment ago. Okay. So this is how I break it down for kids, okay? And it's pretty straightforward and simple, and it gives them two lines of thinking. The two lines of thinking are the what and the how. So I've got to write something and I've got a prompt in front of me. So the first thing I'm going to think about is, what am I going to write about? This is my ideas. How can I work my ideas into paragraphs? If it's a narrative piece of writing, who are my characters and what are my events? If it's a persuasive piece of writing, what are my arguments? Okay, that's all the what stuff. What am I going to write about? So that's all sitting in my head. Now it has to come out of my head onto a piece of paper, screen, whatever we're working on, okay? And that's the how stuff. How we get that onto a piece of paper is sentences, grammar, spelling, and punctuation. And what sort of sits between the two is vocabulary and language. And the difference between vocabulary and language is vocabulary is sort of your individual power words, and your language is your individual power words crafted into phrases or little groups of words. Okay. So if you help your kids to start with, actually, I start with the how. I get control over all this stuff under control. This is your automaticity stuff. This is the stuff that should happen without them having to think about it. Get control of all that, and then we can work on how creative and exciting and interesting we can make our piece of text using the vocabulary and language. Okay, this stuff only works if this stuff works. You have the most amazing ideas in the world. If you can't transfer them to an audience using the sentences, grammar, and punctuation, they're useless. Okay. So these are the kinds of things that get rewarded in a test. And by rewarded, I mean they get you marks, okay? Creative but relevant response to the prompt. And the prompt will be very open, as we discussed before. So relevance just means there has to be some connection between what the student writes and the prompt. And it's a good student can pretty much make any idea connect to the prompt, because the prompt will be very open. Okay. The ones that struggle are the ones that can only come up with the pedestrian or predictable or common idea. Ideas that are linked and elaborated. Now, this is a big problem that I find with kids, particularly in narrative writing, but also in persuasive writing, and they have too many ideas. Okay, so in a short piece of text, they have a character that gets trapped in a cupboard, gets rescued, gets chased by monsters, travels to Mars, is almost killed, goes through a portal, is again confronted by truckloads of saber warrior wielding ninjas, just escapes in time to catch the bus to school, and everything's fine. It's just ridiculous, and it's not uncommon. And even though that sounded like an exaggerated piece of nonsense, believe me, I've read worse. Okay, they don't elaborate their ideas. It's just a series of events. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, and they do the same in persuasive texts. Okay, should we outlaw or ban school camp? School camp's great. It's really good. Kids learn to make friends with other kids. You get to learn new activities. You get to sleep with your friends. You do some kayaking, and there's all my ideas. Not elaborated, no arguments, just a list of ideas. Okay, talked about a coherent, well-structured text, and they get rewarded for this. Appropriate language for purpose. So do they use descriptive language? Description is the easiest thing in the world to teach kids to do, and they learn to do it brilliantly. But if it's not used purposefully, like the apex and the walls and all that other nonsense that we read before, not going to get any marks for it. You can shove in 56,000 adjectives in front of every single noun in the text. If they don't fit the purpose or enhance the meaning, the marker's just going to ignore them. Do we need to use persuasive language in our piece of writing? Okay, do we need to use topic-specific language? So if we are going into a cave or a cavern, like the student was earlier on, do I know enough words that would actually make the reader understand this environment of the cave or the cavern? All right, do I understand that the walls might be covered in moss or lichen? Okay, can I use language that indicates that I've got knowledge of what I'm trying to write about? I might need to use some technical language that would probably be more in a persuasive piece of writing. I will definitely need to use some emotive language, and I might need to use some evaluative language. If I'm writing about a character and I want the reader to understand that they're behaving badly or they're doing something wrong, I might need to use some evaluative language. And last thing we need is a range of grammatically correct sentences, and the range is really important. The grammatically correct, as I said, that should be a given. They should not be making errors at sentence level grammar, and not, I mean not. And the range is there a variety in my sentence patterns? And if we go back to the one where the girl was trapped in the locker, she used a variety of sentence patterns, some short, sharp, simple ones, some long, complex ones, even a couple of rhetorical questions. Okay, so if it is a creative or narrative task, the reason that creative or narrative tasks are often, and I do stress often, not always, used in tests, and this applies, to all kinds of selective entry tests and scholarship tests and things like that, is because there's more scope. There's more scope for the student to demonstrate their talent, and it's particularly from ideas. Okay, so the creative narrative texts are really good for what we call splitting the field, and splitting the field means we get a big range of marks. In a persuasive piece, you're going to have a more limited range of ideas, and therefore you're going to have a more squashed field. You're going to have more kids on similar marks, and that's not necessarily what you want in a test situation. You want to split the field, you want to get a big range of marks, especially at the bottom. Okay, so what are we looking for if a student is going to do well in a narrative or creative piece of writing? They could write a narrative to develop a real or imagined experience. And of course, it's not a real experience. It's a realistic experience or an imagined experience or event. Using effective techniques, relevant descriptive details, and that's in every marking criteria, because descriptive details only get you marks if they make a difference to the text. I screech this at my students every Saturday morning. And well-structured event sequences. We've talked about that. Use precise words and phrases, relevant descriptive details, it comes in again, and sensory language to capture the action and convey experiences and events. Sensory language. Most kids, when they use description, will only describe visual. The world is full of senses. The world is full of what you can smell, what you can hear, etc., not just what you can see. And use narrative techniques such as dialogue, pacing, description, reflection. Okay, they're all narrative techniques that you can teach to children, like the bits of learning to drive, like using your indicators and using your accelerator. You can teach kids all those narrative techniques, but they've still got to bring them together in a relevant and coherent manner, not just pop them into the text like, oh, I haven't got any metaphors, I think I'll shove one in here. No. We use a metaphor if it's helping the reader to get a picture of what we're trying to communicate. If it's a persuasive piece of writing, they write arguments to support claims with clear reasons and relevant evidence. Now, the only bit of these are actually taken from real marking criteria. The relevant evidence doesn't apply necessarily in this kind of a text because they're not going to be able to go and do any research, or the persuasive topic won't require quotations or references or relevant evidence because it's not. That's in a research piece of persuasive writing. They have to have logical reasons. They have to demonstrate an understanding of the topic. So they have to persuade the reader about the topic, not just use a lot of persuasive language. Use words, phrases, and clauses to create cohesion. These are all your words and phrases that that lead the reader through the text so they can work out how one argument links to the next one. And use persuasive techniques such as these things. And again, these are like the narrative devices. You can teach kids all of these things. You can teach them what hyperbole is, and they'll go around and tell you, I know what hyperbole is, which is absolutely fabulous. But you have to be able to use it effectively. Now, I know what cubism is because I've studied Picasso. Can I do it? Absolutely not. Haven't got a hope. So knowing about it and being able to do it, there's a bit of a bridge. So yes, we can teach them these techniques. Teaching them to use them effectively is the big jump. Okay, so I showed you a moment ago an example of a piece of creative writing that a student did. Now we get the persuasive perspective. Okay, now remember that this, in our criteria that we just had a look at, we saw that the student had to use persuasive techniques such as emotive language and hyperbole. They had to use words and phrases to create cohesion and clarify the relationships, and they had to write arguments to support the claim. Now, this was a test activity. The student did this piece of writing under test conditions, and they were asked to review a book. Pretty low-level task, pretty awful task, to be quite honest. But that was the task, and this student rose to the challenge by going, I'm not going to write some pedestrian, awful book review that looks the same as ever 1,000 other kids' book reviews. I'm going to really do a great piece of writing. And she starts by leading us to think that this book, which was called Robin Hood, was the name of the book, is a great piece of writing. And she does this very cleverly. And she starts with, although, use words and phrases that create cohesion. In other words, she's already telling us, starting with this word, this connective, although, that she's going to put a condition on it. Although many people believe that Robin Hood is a stunning piece of fiction that develops the themes, nice use of technical language, of generosity, adventure, and rebellion in a fascinating tale with vibrant characters, Robin Hood is in reality a flawed and tedious story. Now, she's done something very, very clever to begin with. If you get a task like a book review, you don't give the positive book review because 80% of kids will give positive. So you're already going to differentiate yourself by going with the alternative argument, the least popular, the least likely argument. Remember that the student isn't being judged on whether or not they like Robin Hood. That's irrelevant. The student is being judged on how effectively they can write. It's a completely different thing. Okay. Then she goes on. Robin Hood is in reality a flawed and it is told in a drab and old-fashioned manner and has an almost meaningless plot, little bracketed thing, which is painfully dragged out and does not demonstrate any of the supposed life lessons it is meant to contain. We could go on, and you can see what I've done is highlight in green where she's used that language and highlight in yellow where she's used cohesion. although it from the beginning. Wow, these are all little techniques that tie the text together and give it coherence. And as well as that, she's piled in as much emotive language and hyperbole as she can. Her sentence, no errors in grammar, punctuation, or spelling. It's all perfect. It's a given. Okay, it's a given that she wouldn't make errors in grammar, punctuation, or spelling. She's used the best possible persuasion. Her argument hangs together, and it's actually quite interesting to read. Okay. She doesn't get marks for that, unfortunately, but she gets marks for putting all of these features into it together. And remember, she did this under test conditions. It's a pretty good standard. Okay. So what do our kids need to do to lift the quality of their writing, to get it up to a higher standard? Manipulate clauses and sentences. I'll unpack some of this for you a little bit more. Extend sentences using adjectival and adverbial clauses to create a variety of complex sentences. This is baseline stuff. This is stuff they have to absolutely have mastery over. Develop descriptive language structures such as complex nouns and effective verbs. Okay, kids are often taught that description is all about adjectives. Description is rarely about adjectives. You can write, some of the most effective writers in the world use minimal adjectives, because writing is, in narrative or creative writing, what the reader's interested in is what the character does or says or thinks, and that's verbs. They're not really interested if they've got gorgeous flowing glossy hair, because in the end, having gorgeous flowing glossy hair doesn't affect your behaviour all that much. And it's the behaviour of characters that readers are interested in. So, you know, they can have shiny boots and all kinds of drivel like that. It's probably not going to help the reader or help the narrative at all. Use metaphors, similes, and other forms of imagery precisely and meaningfully. I should have put precisely and meaningfully at the beginning, because anybody can stick a metaphor or a simile or some alliteration, God help us, or what about some personification? Let's take a rock and personify it just because we can. Let's not. And this, I'm going to come to this one. Vocabulary, and you notice I've changed it to language use. Okay, because as we said before, students can learn dictionaries full, or should I say thesauruses full of vocabulary, none of which they can use effectively. Okay, I could go and learn 50 of the best possible words in Vietnamese, the most descriptive, the most powerful, the most exciting words in Vietnamese, and I could sprout them all to you. I wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about, because I don't know how to use them effectively. Okay, it's the same in English, the same in any language. Okay, so students will often say, I know a whole lot of powerful and effective words, but this is how I use them. I had to choose a puny path. This is a path that hasn't had sufficient nutrition. I don't know how path can be puny. With absolutely no perils guaranteed. Or choose a hideous path that goes for miles and could lead you to your termination. Kids are actually saying, I had to make a choice. You wouldn't know, would you? Okay. So they thought, my message is, my character is confronted with a dilemma, which is choosing one way or another. How can I, that's not a bad idea. It's a really, a dilemma for a character is a lovely idea to include in a piece of writing. We love that idea. Now let's go to the how stuff. So we've got the what stuff. My idea is I want to write about a character who's having to make a difficult choice, who has a dilemma. Now let's work out how we say it. I had to choose a puny path with absolutely no perils guaranteed. Do they mean if I chose one direction, it would be the safe decision? I think that's what they mean. I think. Now, do you think the marker's going to go through that process of going, oh, I wonder what this child, and the marker's going to go, no, sorry, puny, no, not the right adjective, absolutely no, what are you talking about? I don't even know what you mean. Why have you used the word guaranteed? It's not the effective word to use there. Or choose, okay, I had to choose or choose, okay, so you've got some cohesion in your sentence. The hideous path, a hideous path that goes for miles. Oh, it's a long path, okay, and could lead you. Who is you? We had a first person narrator, and now we've got a second person being addressed. You? It's actually incorrect sentence. What a shame. They're not going to get any marks for all their terminations and perils and guarantees because they've shoved it all into a grammatically incorrect sentence. Disaster. Poor kid. They tried so hard. Okay. Possible questions that you might explore with your children or your students, my students, they're your children. Is my idea a good response to the prompt? Is it the first idea that's popped into my head, in which case it probably is not a good response to the prompt? Because if it's the first idea, it's likely to be the predictable, pedestrian, obvious idea that's jumped into 90% of other kids' heads. Maybe I'll try and eliminate that idea and come up with something a little less predictable. Is it manageable? Another big problem. Sometimes kids come up with really clever, creative ideas, but they're ideas for a novel, not a 6-paragraph piece of writing that you do in 30 minutes under test situations. Okay, you cannot save the universe in 6 paragraphs. Not possible. Okay. If it was possible to write a complex narrative in 6 paragraphs, J.K. Rowling wouldn't have bothered writing 7 books. She could have made her money out of 6 paragraphs. Would have been a lot quicker. Keep your ideas manageable. Okay. They might be exciting and creative and inventive, but the next thing is, are they a manageable idea? Can you get this idea across in a cohesive manner, well written, in 6 to 7 paragraphs? If not, change your idea. Have you organized the text in a way that helps the reader to understand what your ideas and your message is? Because if somebody's reading your text and they have to ask you a question, I don't understand what you mean here by this puny path thing. Tell me, if you have to explain it, it doesn't hold meaning by itself. You've got to think of a better way to write it, because you're not going to be there to explain to the marker, oh, no, this is what I meant. Doesn't matter what you meant, it's what's on the page that you get marked on. Tense, nightmare. Kids need to be absolutely drilled in tense. It's so easy to make tense errors, and it has a massive effect on meaning. If I told you that I was sitting here in what's now got very dark little study, and I told you I am sitting on $1 million on my chair, you'd go, wow, that's pretty interesting. I am sitting on $1 million. But if I told you I was sitting on $1 million 2 years ago, well, you're not as interested. Tense makes a difference, whether it's happening now or in the past or in the future. Making the transition between spoken text and written text, a big jump. And this is usually something that kids in about year 2 to year 3 have to transition away from very spoken-like texts into texts that have the complexity and the richness of a written text that usually is not contained in a spoken text. So I can say my idea and it makes sense. Can I write it? Sentences either too short, too long, or not balanced. Okay. And then things like punctuation, word order, spelling, blah, blah, blah. Those things that, like I said, they're your givens. They're your bread and butter stuff that should make sense by itself. Where do you get your great ideas from? Steal them. I just teach my kids to steal stuff. Okay. Every time I read about or see a movie or whatever, what a great idea. I'm going to steal that idea. But of course, when we steal it, we just change it a little bit. There's no such thing as an original idea. How many movies have been made based on Romeo and Juliet or Cinderella? A version of. Millions. Okay? Not millions. A lot. Because there's kind of only versions or variations or tweaks or changes to ideas. Most texts aren't new or original. They're just a version or a tweak or a change on an idea. Steal your characters, just change them a bit. Steal your settings, just change them a bit. Okay? And this is much easier than saying to kids, oh, just come up with a creative idea. Where from? I've got to get it from something that I already know and understand, which is an idea that I've seen someone else use. And I'm just going to move it, change it, tweak it, adjust it, make it my own. Okay? These are themes that I teach my kids to avoid. Absolutely hate them. They're absolutely overdone and they're awful. Bullying. Are we over bullying? Yes. Are we over dreams? Yes. And anything that is obviously derivative. Like I've had kids write stories, where Harry and Ron are the two main characters. Well, yes, at least call them Jerry and Max or something, and you can change Harry and mix up Harry and Ron and get a composite character, okay? By all means, use the techniques, use the ideas that J.K. Rowling has gifted us with, but change them and make them your own and give them a little bit of a spin or a twist so that they're not obviously recognizable as having been stolen from somebody else. Okay? All right. Now, I said a minute ago that sentences, grammar, punctuation, spelling, etc., the features of a sentence are absolutely critical, because if you can write one really powerful, fantastic, amazing sentence, you can write 4 and stick them into a paragraph. Okay, if you can't write 1 and you try and write 4, you're going to have 4 times the problem. So, how do we do it? We teach our kids to lengthen and strengthen sentences by adding information or details or elaborating or building it up with a combination of vocabulary, language use, and expanding the idea. So this is my idea. The animal looked at him. Well, that's okay. That's my idea. That's what I want to convey to my readers. That's the what. The how is what I do with that now. The animal's emerald eyes sent him a message. Oh, I've gone a little bit metaphorical. That's quite nice. The emerald eyes, yeah, it's definitely an improvement. It's not great though. Let's see if we can strengthen it even further. As he squinted through the flickering candlelight, the creature's emerald eyes met his gaze, and he realized that it was trying to send him a message. Same idea. It's this basic idea. This is the what, this is the how. Build it up and build it up. You're not going to go from here to here in half an hour. This is drill, this is practice, this is how do we do it, how do we do it. Once we've got mastery at this level, we're on the road to success. Okay? Whoever just did that, can they get off the screen? Thank you. Okay, all right, so just if we're nearly there, this is my idea. This is your challenge. Do it. Change it This is exactly the same sentence structure that's here. It's the same structure. You'll go. Make Max walk past the house into a 3 or 4 clause sentences with that fabulous vocabulary. I'm not going to ask you to do it, but it shows you that it's not as easy as you thought. You know, okay, how can we strengthen it? Oh, he walked past the blue house or the big house? Nah, because that's not the main idea. Okay, Max is our character. Let's focus on Max, not the house. Max, who was tall and wearing blue pants. We care? No, he could be short and wearing red pants. Not going to make any difference. Okay, this is how you go through it with kids. Don't just add stuff in because you can. Okay, add stuff in because it's developing the idea. Okay, all right. So I'm not actually going to make you do that. You can have a go if you like. It's up to you. Okay, so let's finish on a really good note. Okay. This gorgeous, amazing piece of writing was actually created by a student when she was close to the end of Year 5. She had not yet ended Year 6. And she wrote this piece of text about writing. Now, I'm fairly sure that she was aware she was a very good writer. Okay, she was a really talented writer. She didn't need me. She had plenty of people who told her that before. So she wrote a reflective piece about writing. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect. Okay, and it was a draft. She didn't fix it or massage it or play with it or get any advice on it. This came straight from her. How does knowledge of the past, present, and even speculation about the future come into our grasp? See how she drags the reader in? See how she presents them with a thought-provoking question? She answers it for us straight away, writing. And then she expands on that idea. Writing allows us to open doors we never looked at in the world of knowledge. Historians leave us with their pieces of writing of the past to uncover the winding path, see how she uses imagery but effectively, that the future set in place for us. It's more than a necessity. It is the superior way of communicating. Writing is, however, a Herculean feat. That's the standard. That's your competition. Okay. I think that's a nice positive note to end on. And I hope that seeing pieces of writing like that doesn't send you into down the puny path of, oh yeah, but she's just really good. No, so she's been taught to write and she's learnt to write and it's a skill. You can learn it, okay? It's not a gift or a talent. There's an element of some students just have a flair for it. I'll give you that. But it's a learned activity. You can do it. You can teach kids to do it and they can do it. Okay. That's probably more than enough for you to digest after 1 hour. So I'll say thank you so much for your attention and I wish you all the very, very best. When I said it was a learned skill, it is a learned skill. It's not an easy one to learn, but it is possible.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. Yeah, I believe all attendees found this webinar informative and get a better idea about how to create a good quality writing in the exam. Yeah, so yeah, we got not enough time to do the Q&A at the moment. Just one question, which was commonly asked question to Ms. Kim. So we have just a 30 minutes writing test. So how can we use this short 30 minutes time limit to complete the writing test properly? Yes, how we need to plan for the Yeah, the time, 30 minutes. So how many minutes for the planning, something like that?
How
Yeah.
many minutes for the training? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. The
Yes,
30 minutes is
yeah,
the
we have
30.
only 30 minutes to complete the writing test. So there is only 30 minutes to
Yes,
finish the complete the writing test. So
yeah.
is there any better idea to use the time wisely to, yeah,
They don't have a
make the good
choice in how they
writing?
use the time. They write for the 30 minutes. They don't have a choice. That's why I said that you need to give your kids, they need to be taught to respond to a prompt really fast. And, you know, I actually teach my kids, I give them, you know, 4 to 6 what I call foundation ideas. And I say, okay, you're going to use one of these. You're going to and then you're going to massage that idea to make it fit the prompt. But I give them these foundation ideas so they don't go in with a blank head and go, what do I do with that duck floating on a piece of water, or that broken chain, or that, you know, seascape, or whatever the prompt happens to be. But I go, okay, teach them, you know, you got your 4 to 6 foundation ideas. Show me how you can adapt it, change it, massage it to fit the prompt. And then just write and follow your 6-paragraph structure, follow all your techniques that we've learned, because the how stuff is the stuff you're already good at. You already have that under your belt before you go into that test, because we've worked on it and worked on all those techniques. And now you just have to apply those techniques to the what stuff, the ideas and the paragraphs.
Okay, got it. Okay, one last question. How can I improve my vocab? Can you recommend a good source of vocab skills? Yeah,
This
the
goes back
vocab.
to the problem of learning a billion words in isolation. Look, I don't think that learning words is a completely valueless skill, but the value from it only comes if they learn the words and then you see them use them. Because what research tells us is that students will retain a word that they have learnt in isolation for about 4 to 6 weeks. And if they haven't used it effectively a number of times over that period, they won't retain it. And you can stick that word back under their nose in 2 months' time and I go, oh yeah, I've heard of it, but I forget. I don't know. I forget. I don't know what it means. They're better having a smaller range of words with broad applicability, words that you can use in lots of different circumstances. I'm just going to, maybe if I give you a quick example, let's go back and have a look at, okay, we can use Yen's. Let's have a look at hers. Okay, let's have a look where she's used something. A word like speculation, that's got pretty broad applicability. Okay, it's not specific to a particular kind of idea or a particular kind of writing. You could possibly use that word in a lot of different circumstances. So it's a worthwhile word to keep using. Just going back to see if I can find one of my other kids' pieces of writing. Okay, see this one. This is an example. Puny. Okay, it's a reasonably strong adjective, but it's got pretty limited applicability. Unless you're going to write about some undernourished kid, not a lot of applicability there. And you certainly can't use it with paths. Okay, it's peril. Now, peril's a nice word. It's got pretty broad applicability. This particular student didn't use it well, but it is still an example of a word that you would be able to use in a lot of different contexts. If you're going to kill someone, how often would you say they were terminated? Good Lord, they're dead. How often do you see in literature or in film or in any kind of narrative context where we see that the person was terminated? I don't think so. Okay, so that's possibly the best thing to, if you are going to learn words in isolation, at least learn words that are going to have a pretty broad applicability. Otherwise, just read quality literature, read quality text, and the flow of language that comes in that kind of quality of writing will be internalized as over time. It won't happen within a day or a week, but over time you internalize those and that usage of language and that manipulation of language that gives you the quality of writing.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, so yeah, it's time to finish. So I hope you enjoy the program. And yes, we will see you at 7 p.m. for another webinar regarding the thinking skill test.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Kim.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.